You're listening to the SoleStrategies podcast, hosted by the team here at SoleStrategies. We hope you like the latest episode, and thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the SoleStrategies podcast. I'm your host, James Ray, and today we have a handful of guests who are going to be talking about fundraising and how SoleStrategies can potentially help your campaign raise a bit more money, something very, very critical to the solvency of pretty much any campaign. So would any of you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I can go first. My name is Tasha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm just one of the call time managers for Sole. I'm based out of Boston.
Hi, my name is Alexis Lopez. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the other side of the fundraising team at Sole, and I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia.
Amazing. Okay, so let's dig into it then a little bit. What is fundraising? What are some major components, and why does it matter to a campaign?
So fundraising is basically the entire foundation of a campaign. So the big thing about what makes a campaign so successful is that they have the financial force behind them to pay for staff and pay for ads and all of the other critical components of a campaign that really gets the message out there about a candidate. And so if your financial foundation isn't, super strong, it's going to make it super hard to build the rest of the campaign out. And really, even if you have a really great policy and a platform and just ideas that you feel are really going to help your community, if you don't have the fundraising foundation to really just get those ideas and turn them into a reality, it's going to be extremely hard to even get the campaign off the ground.
Okay, amazing. So what are some strategies then of going about fundraising that seem effective for candidates on the ground? I know there's a lot of jargon that kind of goes around regarding things like call time, regarding, like social media fundraising, email marketing, et cetera. Can you go through maybe a couple of those and just kind of explain what they are?
Yeah, I can start off with call time because that's mainly what I focus on. So it's really just exactly what it sounds like. You're going to sit down for like 8 hours a day and just make phone calls to possible donors. With Sole, you get just a huge list of people who will agree with you based on policy, on other people who've donated to other candidates who you might align with. And you just call them, you tell them a little bit about yourself, and you make this thing called a hard ask, where you ask, hey, can you donate $200 to help me reach more voters in the area? And it's one of the most time-consuming ways, I think, to do fundraising, but it also gets you probably the most money in the long run. It's super important.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another large component of fundraising is the events and emails. So with call time, you're having to basically just do direct contact with donors. So you have to really have a good idea about what you plan to do once you're in office, why you're running for office, what kind of influence you to just take this big step. And then through fundraising events and emails, you're really able to utilize your network to do donor contact that is in a different way that doesn't really involve a phone call, but more so of an email that highlights an endorsement that you got or a big event that you have going on. And then with events, you can kind of do meet and greets. I definitely encourage candidates to utilize the local businesses in their area just because it drives money back into the economy. And it looks good to really be highlighting the local businesses that are already in the community, that are already serving the community. And then with high dollar donor events, usually that involves some of your the network that you have access to that is willing to invest large amounts of money to not only host an event, but bring in their network so that you can expand that event and have even more donations coming into the campaign.
Okay, so a lot of those seem very, very time consuming. What would you say as far as donation strategies or fundraising strategies have the most return on investment for the effort that you put in? I know call time is kind of typically seen as being the most effective means of fundraising, but also something that takes a really, really good amount of time. I've heard of candidates phone banking, basically doing call time for 12 hours a day. Although I've also known many that go anywhere from 4 to 6, but it's kind of like a general note that the more you do, the better likelihood of good results you have. So are other methods of fundraising sort of similar to that? I know with like social media oriented fundraising, it's kind of like a passive fundraising where if your content and following is built up well and properly, you can then solicit them for funds that might potentially give you sporadic donations. But with call time, it's like you are in the seat making the calls, locked into a position for upwards of hours a day. So with event planning and everything like that, what does that look like for the, I guess, the schedule of a candidate?
I think a lot of it just depends on the network that they have access to. I know with the candidates that I work with, I really encourage them to, if you're running for office, you should already have a network built up. And that means your alumni network, people you work with, community engagement activities that you've been doing, like volunteer work, of people that already know who you are as a person and would be willing to promote the events that you're hosting. And really, when you're doing an event in a local business, because it's local, it's going to be a little bit of a different process compared to having an event at a chain, because if it's a mom and pop shop, usually they're a little bit easier to work with and they're very excited to get the promotion towards their business. So I think that they all require there's really no easy avenue of fundraising. Like, they all require time and energy, but it really depends on the network that the candidate is working with before they decide to run for office. And that's going to determine the ease that they have with just fundraising in these different events. And then call time. I would also say that there's definitely a difference between the experience that challengers versus incumbents have with fundraising. And I think that's something that could definitely you just have to look at it a different way in accordance to what are the circumstances of the race you're running in. But the consistent piece of fundraising is that if you have a network, you're going to have a way easier time, at least building up the starter money for your campaign.
No, and that makes total sense. And I think a lot of candidates forget it, particularly in regards to fundraising, that even going into a campaign, you already need to have established infrastructure, contacts, things like that. I've seen a lot of campaigns over the years, particularly when I was in college doing internships with campaigns in Indiana, where they would kind of run and then have really no definitive fundraising strategy, very little, if any, built-in infrastructure. Some candidates really haven't done anything in their community that would allow them to actually fundraise from where they are, which is something that social media can help with, because you can build a nationwide appeal on apps like Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Although it's such a hit or miss fundraising strategy that I think at times it's something that no campaign should feel as if they're relying on.
Yeah.
But it definitely does seem like a lot of candidates don't, I think, initially understand how important already having rapport with the community is before you run to advocate for that community, which seems kind of like a no-brainer on paper, but I think it's something that a lot of people really struggle with as they're, trying to explore where they fit into a larger political framework. But it is interesting nonetheless. Do you feel as if there's either of you, do you feel as if there's very common kind of pitfalls or problems that a lot of candidates face when they are fundraising? Issues related to call time, issues related to just getting general fundraising up, little common screw ups or things like that might inhibit a candidate's ability to fundraise?
I don't know if it's a screw up or anything, but I think it's just not having the time to be able to fundraise kind of early on, especially if you're working a full-time job, if you have kids, if there's so many other factors where you can't sit down with these huge 8-hour chunks every single day to make these phone calls. It can be really hard on candidates, and I've seen it happen where they just will only have an hour or two a day to make calls, and so they're not going to get as much money. And then if you don't have money in the beginning, you can't promote yourself, and then no one knows who you are when it's time to vote.
I also think in regard to call time, it can definitely, call time is kind of similar to being a salesperson, where you are cold calling people and essentially selling yourself and convincing them that hey, I'm a good candidate and I have good ideas and I want to help my community. And I think that what I've seen consistently, regardless of the level of office that a person is running for, or, even the network that they have, in regard to call time, it can be really discouraging getting that first no. And I've seen candidates be I shouldn't be doing this. I should drop out because this person hung up on me. And I think a big part of what we do at Sole, especially in regard to call time, is definitely keeping that momentum up and reaffirming or affirming to them that, you are a good candidate, you have good ideas. And just because this person hung up on you, it doesn't mean that you should go take a nap and call it a day. So I think just a problem with just the anxiety that can come from call time, especially at the beginning, if you've never done it before, and then just being consistent. Like the largest component about call time is making sure that you are putting in consistent time, which is marking off time in your schedule every single day. So like, you can't plan an event during this time or, go to a party because you have call time. You have to do it every single day to see a return on that investment. And the good thing about call time is that it gets easier as you go along. So I haven't seen someone at the beginning of call time still feel those same nerves at at the end of call time or after they've had a month of making those calls. So I think that just really practicing and being comfortable with a no and realizing that one no is not going to determine the future of your campaign, or it should not have an impact on how you feel about yourself as a candidate, is a really big thing to just keep in mind for everyone, regardless of, what they're running for.
No, I mean, and that makes total sense to me. I think a lot of candidates forget both that their campaigns are really not driven by any one interaction really with a voter, and that there are people in districts, people even outside of your district, that are not going to want to donate, not want to be solicited for any donations, et cetera. And I think from phone banking experience, that can really ruin the energy temporarily.
Yeah.
But I think too that a lot of politicians, a lot of political candidates, people who are trying to run, and this, I think, does oftentimes end up being kind of a class element, or like there's a class element to being able to run politically.
Definitely.
Because if you don't have time to spend on these things, you're just not going to do as well. So, the lack of like maybe what we would consider like a public funding strategy for political candidates really does inhibit like lower class people or working class people's ability to campaign and be representatives, which I think is a whole thing. But even disregarding that, I think a lot of candidates do forget that, call time fundraising specifically for a campaign is essentially a second job.
Yes.
Which is incredible that like
Yeah.
just the sheer amount. I mean, you're essentially doing a part-time job if you're doing call time functionally where you should be doing it.
Yeah. And I really like that you mentioned just the class aspect of running for office and how fundraising ties into that, because it can definitely, again, be a little bit disheartening when you're running for office and you feel like, oh my God, like the person I'm running against is an incumbent. They have tons of money. They have tons of like time. Like they don't even have to do call time because they're relying on their 5 millionaire friends to fund their entire campaign. And I think that is definitely an aspect of grassroots fundraising that can be discouraging. But I also think that there is so much value in having those conversations because, donations from 100 donors means a lot more compared to like donations from like 5 big donors. And just the sense of that you have practice talking about your platform and your policy and what you want to get done. And also just a big part of call time is listening to people. And, the approach that we take is we talk to donors and we have the candidate ask them like, so what are some of the issues that you'd like to see addressed in your community? What are some issues that you feel are just being ignored? And a lot of the time, donors are just not used to being asked that question. And, or even during call time, I've had so many people that are like, this is the first time a political candidate has ever called me. The conversation just kind of goes from there. So the ability to create that personal connection between a donor and a candidate is so valuable because it shows that you are willing to set aside the time and energy to listen to someone. And what that does is it largely informs the campaign and lets them know, okay, this is a policy that we really need to be paying a lot more attention to. Also, what I've seen happen is that a donor will call someone that lives across the country and this person cannot vote for them. Maybe they're not even aware that this election is happening, but because they develop that personal connection, they're like, yeah, I will give you $500. Please, like, let me know what I can do to help you out. Like, I want to support you. And I think it just comes down to who you are as a candidate and where are you needed in this race and what are you really trying to do in your community. And I think if you have that down, call time is going to be easier because you are able to build that personal connection with the person that you're talking to, even if it's the first time they have ever heard of you or this race, or, you know, they're not even someone that's really interested in politics.
No, I mean, that makes total sense to me. Do you think generally that in regards to Sole's kind of component, or there are kind of strategy for fundraising, how do we really kind of go about helping candidates both fundraise, but also maybe avoid some of the common pitfalls of fundraising and some of the kind of common problems that many candidates might face?
Hey, you're listening to the SoleStrategies podcast. Take a moment to listen to some of our esteemed champions and their takeaways from the program.
And I'm glad that I was a part of that I had the opportunity to even be involved with that, with some legitimate organizations that help people who want to do right by other people, you know, by communities.
You know, utilize my resources, utilize my networks. This has, the last month, I've had some tremendous things happen.
It's your time to become a leader. Go to SoleStrategies.com to find out more.
Well, I think a large part of that is setting a standard at the beginning. So when we first have that onboarding meeting, I make it extremely clear, like, this is the time commitment I need from you. Now, mind you, they're not going to be dealing with this alone. I get calls, texts, all hours of the night because they need help, or they just need a boost of, you know, motivation. But yeah, I make it very clear that we're in this together. So if you're not having a good call time day, I'm also not having a good call time day, and we're both going to be miserable. Whereas their wins are my wins and vice versa. Like, being able to just create that connection with the candidate so that they do have a support system. Because what I've seen is, I've had candidates say, like, this is the best call time experience I've ever had, because they're used to companies just having them call through their Facebook list, or they haven't even gotten down to the root of, like, what makes, how do you develop that connection with the donor, or how do you tailor your messaging to the different demographics that you're talking to? So really working out the details ahead of time helps them go into this feeling way more confident. So I'm never just throwing them into the deep end and, like, figure it out, like, good luck. We really work out all those kinks ahead of time. So that first call, they're not going into this not knowing what to expect. We also involve a component of something called pitch play, where Tasha and I will pretend to be donors, and we will go through every single scenario of donor they will ever encounter. So someone that is hanging up on them, like, how do you deal with someone that is trying to rush off of the phone? How do you deal with someone that fields you a really difficult question that maybe you didn't think of before? Like, do you have every component of your platform down? Can you say it in your sleep? Like, really building up that confidence that they know exactly what they're talking about, and also knowing how to feel out the vibe of a conversation. So if someone is kind of not really feeling it, like, we show them how to navigate those different conversations with donors so that they feel confident. Like, the biggest thing is just building up that confidence before they start call time, and then enforcing that commitment and consistency with what the time they're putting towards fundraising.
Okay. And Tasha, have you kind of seen any, like, common pattern that comes out of, like, maybe call time, any, like, successful strategies that you've seen that you think, like, has existed across candidates that maybe you've kind of honed in on as being, like, really critical elements for successful call time fundraising?
Yeah, I think the most successful candidates are ones who have done their research on every other candidate in the campaign, on previous races for this, like, seat that they're running for, and who just feel really confident on their platform and are willing to even admit that, like, oh, I don't have that policy yet. Can you tell me more about it? And willing to, like, learn and work with, like, the voters and the donors. And there's kind of, like, candidates who are really open-minded and just not stuck heavily on, like, oh, this is my, like, 1, 2, and 3 main points, but they're willing to kind of, like, adapt and learn with everyone.
No, that makes sense. I feel like adaptability, especially in cold calling, is really, really critical to success, and that more open-minded candidates in particular have a better time. And I feel like you all have kind of, you both have noted that it's more than just a fundraising element, particularly with call time. I know that, like, with an advertisement on, like, Facebook or Instagram and even, like, Twitter, like, social media fundraising and email marketing, it's not as interpersonal. But in regards to, like, call time, it seems as if it plays more than just a fundraising element. It's that there's also kind of an element of like engagement with either people in your community or like-minded individuals, and kind of like a soft polling mechanism to kind of gauge like what people in your community think, or like issues they might hold that might make your campaign stronger, which I think is another benefit to especially like a call time fundraising strategy, is that you're not only trying to raise money, but you're kind of gauging the temperature in a way without actually having to hire pollsters and actually like have an entire service built around that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big part of what makes call time so successful is that you are like at the beginning of the campaign, like call time is really the main way that candidates raise money because they don't have money for events or, you know, just other avenues of fundraising. So through call time, when you're doing that at the beginning of the campaign and you are still figuring out what this looks like, what it's like running for office, what being a candidate is all about, by the time that things start picking up, you are so familiar with how to connect with donors and voters and talk about your ideas and articulate yourself in a way that really convinces people that you are a competent leader, that it's kind of a cakewalk. like it makes it so much easier to do speaking engagements and talk at events and connect with voters that maybe aren't so sure about your campaign. Like you have so much experience doing all of those elements of what comes later on in a campaign, but also you are not a stranger to rejection. Like I have had candidates that just get hung up on, or someone's like, actually, I'm supporting your opponent, and they're able to just not internalize those that rejection, so that later on when they are doing other stuff or they are met with rejection in person, it's kind of like, well, I've been hung up on 15 times. This is a cakewalk. Like they're very familiar with how to sell their brand and sell themselves as a candidate. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. And what politics is about on a broader scale is just really convincing voters that you have their best interests in mind. And with grassroots fundraising or just a grassroots campaign overall, you have to rely on those personal connections, because if you don't, there's really no campaign there. And it sucks because, again, incumbents that have been in office for 50 million years and everyone knows their name, like they have a little bit of an easier time. But I've worked with candidates that are running against people that have been in office for a while, and they know the name of the incumbent, but they have no idea who that person actually is. Like they could not pick them out of the crowd. And because of call time, they know this new candidate that's running for office and they're excited about them. And I think call time brings in a level of excitement that makes people eager to turn out for a candidate and really see this through.
Okay, amazing. And I guess since we've kind of gotten through the bulk of it, I know that SoleStrategies is doing a sort of webinar coming up soon. Could you maybe go into a little bit of detail about that before we kind of close out?
Yeah. So I am very excited. So it is our Kickstart Fundraising Cohort Program webinar. So we are going to be really breaking down the elementary basics of fundraising, going through all of the definitions, the different components of fundraising, like social media fundraising, email marketing, call time, which we've talked a lot about, and then events, and really just breaking down all of the different components of what brings those the fundraising foundation together and what that all involves, and how a candidate can feel confident and comfortable knowing what they are getting themselves into, and also just familiarizing themselves with different components of their campaign that are going to definitely be more, that are going to just come up more often closer to election day.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Do you know when that is happening or what day?
Yes, so it is going to be Wednesday, August 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, amazing. I'll probably just end up popping in just to kind of see what all's going on with it. But regardless, are there any kind of closing thoughts that either of y'all have regarding fundraising?
Yeah, we are very excited.
But yeah, I mean, do y'all have maybe any closing tips, anything like that before we kind of wrap it up?
Do your research, have a network, and just get ready for a very long road in front of you. with a very happy ending, hopefully.
Awesome. And anything from you?
Yeah, I think I would say just you are running for office for a reason, and you know what you want to do in this seat, and it's up to you to really convey that to donors and voters. And you got this. You're so intelligent and awesome. So just carry that energy into your fundraising because you are going to need it.
Okay, well, amazing. That being said, this has been an episode of the SoleStrategies podcast. I'm your host, James Ray. Thank you again, Tasha and Alexis. Y'all have been amazing. It's a pleasure talking with you. I hope to have you all out again sometime to talk more in depth about some of this stuff. But
Thank you so
anyway,
much.
I hope, yeah, of course. But anyway, have a great day.